Then a very warm welcome to Lord Dartmouth, who's the UKIP MEP. He's represented the southwest of England and Gibraltar in the European Parliament. He was elected in 2009 and again in 2014. Not only is he geographically relevant to us this morning, but he's also the international trade spokesman for UKIP and the EFDD, and is a member of the INTA committee. So, William, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining us. We need to continue talking while we get William mic'd up. So William has come.
I think I'm going to go. My family always complain that my voice is too loud, so I might even have to take the microphone off. But anyway, now before going forward anymore, I'm going to make one basic fact, which doesn't seem to be in the public domain as much as it should be, which is that the EU, that the UK has a deficit in goods with the EU of £96 billion. That's roughly equivalent to the entire gross domestic product of Ghana. That is the background on which, when we discuss tariffs and trade. There is a small surplus on services, which is about 14 billion, but obviously the deficit on goods is bigger than that by a dimension. Now I've also now got just four slides. You may feel you're being short-changed here. This slide compares the export of goods to the EU from the UK and from China. Now, as most people know, China is not what I'm going to talk about is basically trading under World Trade Organization rules. China is not a member of the European Union. It does not have a trade agreement with the European Union. It trades with the European Union under World Trade Organization rules. Yet, China consistently exports more to the EU than the UK by about 1.5 times. Now, services, because normally somebody says, what about services? How we go on to the next one? Sorry. Shall I just say next, if I may? This is services. This slide compares the exports of services to the EU from the UK and from the US. The United States consistently exports about 1.5 more times in services than the UK exports to the member states of the European Union. Next. Now here is perhaps the most compelling point. Here is the list of the top 10 exporters to the European Union in 2017. Now I particularly draw your attention to the countries with asterisks. I don't know if you can see those at the back, because they don't have any trade agreement with the European Union. And for those at the back, I would simply point out that the three top exporters to the European Union, China, the United States, and Russia, do not have a trade agreement with the European Union. They trade under World Trade Organization rules. It also applies, it's the top 3, and it's also 6 of the top 10. Now, if anybody is really, I think some of the professionals here probably know, probably Ms. Cavell knows, as you ought to, that Japan does have a trade agreement with the European Union, but it has not yet been implemented, and it certainly hadn't been implemented in 2017. Now finally, next. And this slide, you're never going to see this on the BBC, by the way. They won't show you this on Newsnight. You're not allowed to see this. This is the EU's declining share of world trade. There's the EU on the left here, 30% of world trade, not bad. Here we are, 2039, 10% of world trade. And that 10% figure is with the United Kingdom. It's declining, it's a declining entity. It's a declining entity. Now, I am in Cornwall, so I've made some specific facts about the EU and Cornwall. First of all, Newquay Airport. Newquay Airport is worth about £50 million to the economy of Cornwall in employment alone. And doubtless Mr. Painter will come up with an even more accurate figure than I just have. This is just in terms of jobs that we lost without it. However, Newquay Airport makes a loss. As such, it has to be subsidised by the British government, and rightly so, by the way. As Newquay Airport is subsidised, it runs foul of, it violates the European Commission rules on aviation state aid. Now, the European Commission has, however, given Newquay Airport a derogation, an exemption from these rules. But the point I'm making is that were we to remain in the European Union, the existence of Newquay Airport would continue to depend on this derogation continuing. And given how the European Commission operates, this is a lot less than a cast iron certainty. In fact, I would go further than that to say it is uncertain that this exemption would continue to be allowed and Newquay Airport would be at very, very serious risk. Please bear that in mind when you hear various things. Now, fishing. The other speaker didn't want to talk about fishing. I'm not surprised, actually. But so let's first of all look at Cornwall, compared with the Netherlands. Now, the coastline of Cornwall is 1,086 kilometres, according to the Ordnance Survey. Sorry to be in kilometres, but we're very international around here. The Netherlands coastline, by contrast, measures 451 kilometres on the same basis, less than half. Cornwall has a much bigger coastline, and it follows that it has, broadly speaking, as much or more fishing waters than the Netherlands. But let's see what happens under the Common Fisheries Policy. In 2016, Cornwall landed 17,500 tonnes of fishery products, valued at just over 43 million euros. Not bad. But in the same year, the Netherlands, with, as you will remember, a smaller coastline, landed 413,000 tonnes of fishing products, valued at 586 million euros. That is 13.5 times as much. That is the effect of the Common Fisheries Policy, and this is just unfair. You're going to have your chance later, Lord Tennyson. The fact is that the EU's Common Fisheries Policy takes and takes and takes from Cornwall's fishermen and the Cornwall economy over and over and over again, and that alone is a sufficient reason for Cornwall to be better off and to leave and to be out of the EU. Now, I'm going to talk about World Trade Organization rules and trade. Now, your Brexit conference today is not an advice bureau, but I'd like to start by talking about divorce. Divorce can be painful, and the most painful part is to make it fun. There's claim and counterclaim, blame and counterclaim. Indeed, divorce can often get nasty, although that should not be necessary. But the worst part of it is who gets to keep what? Who pays? How much do they pay? Now, after the referendum, we are getting divorced from what was in effect a marriage with the European Union. And it was worth pointing out just quickly, and I'm old enough to remember, that what we entered into 43 years ago with 6 other European countries with similar economies was to be part of a common market. It was a free trade area. It was not intended to be a marriage with 27 countries, many with different economies and a different stage of development. Nor did people vote, and I voted to go in 1975. Nor were people voting to be part of a European superstate. But now the EU wants our money, and the excuse given is that these billions of euros was in the EU budget. Now, I'm in the presence of a lot of very experienced businessmen, and also I can say this also too as a chartered accountant myself, that a budget is just that, a budget. It is a projection, it is a forecast, it is not a reality. Assumptions can and do change, as they have in this case. Legally, as even the House of Lords Committee has confirmed, we owe the EU nothing. If we do choose to give them anything at all, that will be our choice, and that will be our generosity, and should be seen as such. I'm reminded, as Lennon McCartney once wrote, "Can't buy me love, can't buy me love, money can't buy me love." And that's perhaps what That is perhaps what Mrs May and the British government found out yesterday at Salzburg. 40 billion euros, an unnecessary 40 billion euros, or no 40 billion euros. To continue with this divorce analogy, we are yet to get divorced, finally, but some people are already taking sides. Unfortunately, many people who ought to be on our side are in fact on the other side. As Mervyn King, the former governor of the Bank of England, pointed out in a recent BBC interview, and thank you BBC, Mervyn King said, they, that is to say the EU, must have been really worried that they had 27 countries to try to corral. How could they have a united negotiating position when they were dealing with a country that was one country that had made a clear decision to leave? How on earth could the EU manage to negotiate against this one decisive group on the other side of the channel? He went on to say, this is the governor of the Bank of England saying this, not me, the former governor. Well, he said the reality has been completely the opposite. The EU has been united, has been clear, has been patient, and it's the UK that's been divided without any clear strategy at all for how to get to where we want to go. And a large part of the problem that Mervyn King has set out is because of the actions of a group of people who ought to know better. And what makes it worse is that these are the same people who told us, instructed us endlessly at the time of the referendum, you must accept the outcome. But that was when they thought that they would win. What they are now doing is carefully, blatantly, and in my view, disgracefully, trying to overturn the result. Now, to the Labour Party, which is the opposition. The Labour Party policy on Brexit, nobody really knows what Labour stands for. But what is clear, what seems to be clear, is that a majority of Labour MPs, who unlike the House of Lords, which I was in briefly, people have actually voted for, want the UK to remain in the single market. Not a single market, the single market. There only is one. Now, being in the single market has consequences. It means freedom of movement, an endless and enduring stream of payments to the EU, and that we continue to acknowledge the superiority of the European Court of Justice. These are facts. But there is one economic fact which is even more important. And again, you hardly ever hear this. Only around 12% of the UK's economy is accounted for by exports to the other 27 member states. And that proportion is going down. Nevertheless, so long as we remain in the so-called single market, so long will 100% of our economy, all our economy, the other 88%, be subject to all the rules, laws, regulations and directives of the European Union. And these are entirely job-destroying, prosperity-destroying, and the rest. And out of the EU, as actually Katie Cavell said, one thing I agree with what she said, by the way, a few other things. Out of the EU, we would have no say at all, not even the totally inadequate say that we have at the moment on the determination of single market rules. This is really, really, really the worst of both worlds, and I hope you will consider this point very carefully. Now, that would not be a good outcome for our country. So this means, in essence, I advocate that we trade under WTO rules, no deal rules. Now, I'm not going to be I'm not a conjurer. Well, this is, of course, is a magical moment and a magical day. But I am going to produce a prop here. This is a bottle of wine that was produced in Australia. Now, you may have seen, some of you may have even consumed wine produced in Australia. We buy more wine produced in Australia than we do from any other country. We buy more wine produced in Australia than we buy from France, from Italy, from Spain. And wine produced in Australia competes successfully on price. I don't think it competes on quality, on price, with wines produced in Spain, France, Italy, even Bulgaria. This is despite the very large distances also. But Australia, as of now, does not have a trade agreement with the European Union, although one is in negotiation, as Pascal has. Far less is there unconditional free movement or any right to settle for Australians. My ex-wife was Australian. She thought there should be. I rather agree. But it's not, but they can still. And far less does Australia pay for access to the European Union market. Nonetheless, the access that Australia does have to the EU markets, including the United Kingdom, without a trade agreement, without free movement, and without having to pay for access to the EU market, is sufficient for it to be the largest seller of wine in the United Kingdom. And Australia trades under WTO rules. And in case anyone here thinks that wine is too frivolous an example, not businessy enough, I would point out that exactly the same applies to iPhones. Anyone got an iPhone? They all come from countries that don't have a trade agreement, with the possible exception of Samsung, and also the components in iPhones. The same applies. And the slide, I'm afraid, the slide in the previous presentation about access was just wrong. Every country in the world has access to the European Union markets, including North Korea, which is a pariah state. What they don't all have is tariff-free access, and that is an entirely different conversation, and an entirely different concept, and an entirely different fact. The point that I'm making is that we in the UK would have the similar access to the EU markets that Australia, Russia, China and the United States has now, without a trade agreement, but trading under World Trade Organization rules. And also, on Brexit, we would be able to resuscitate our seat on the World Trade Organization. At the moment, we don't have a full seat on the World Trade Organization, we only have a kind of observer status. But what is 100% right is that we have to be prepared, and also, equally important, we have to be prepared to walk away from these negotiations because they're getting nowhere. So the prospect of trading under World Trade Organization rules, to quote Franklin Delano Roosevelt at his inauguration in 1933, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Thank you very much.